So that was great. I hope everybody had an opportunity to meet somebody that they might not have met yet in some of the early meetings. There's going to be time throughout the course of the next day and a half where you have the opportunity to get to know people, the work they're doing, and why they're committed to this. So hopefully those questions started, the beginning of a discussion that we hope to have over the next day and a half. What I'm going to do in the next 40-ish minutes or so is really tee up how we got to where we are today, and specifically how this group and the conversations we've had to date have informed the direction that we took for the workshop over the next day and a half. So as I mentioned, this was really a group think in terms of the evolution of this project. And it really stems from the fact that as patients and researchers and clinicians, we oftentimes look at a topic in different ways. So with regards to this specific project, Mary Scott, who raised her hand earlier, has been a longstanding partner in crime with me on some of the work that I've done. She's been a great champion for really thinking about how we create an equal space, especially recognizing that as researchers, we often speak a language that isn't common to most people. And how do we break some of those barriers for just common discussions and leveling the playing field, getting away from acronyms, really explaining some of the things that we may have learned 10 years ago in graduate school, but what has become common speak for us isn't necessarily common speak for others. And so how do we address that up front and reduce that barrier from the get-go? Mary continues to challenge me to think about things differently, and it's something I very much value. Karen Wernli, who I introduced earlier as well, was funded one of our early funded PCORI awardees in the Northwest. And she and I talked a lot. This was a new experience for her to engage patients as part of the research that she's done. And I'm always inspired by the work that she does. And as somebody new to this type of work, she brought a lot of thoughtful experiences to the table and really talked about the fact that many of us still struggle with figuring out how do we find the right person to partner with in the work that we're doing. So bringing that perspective and some of the challenges she's faced as part of building this as part of her work. And then Joanna, who raised her hand earlier, she joins us from the Arthritis Foundation for the Great West region. She brings a different perspective as somebody who works with an advocacy organization and sees this opportunity to help support the patients that they serve become equal partners in research, but also the constraints of being with an advocacy organization that also has finite resources. And how do we as a community build resources, tools, and materials that can help support the broader effort? The one thing that I will say, and Shannon Marsh, who has been a long-term research partner in research, has brought this to this issue to the table, is that this isn't a new concept. The whole idea of patient engagement isn't new. But what I think is new is the fact that we're seeing this widespread uptake, largely driven by PCORI's funding, where it's no longer in one condition-specific application, but really across types of research that truly haven't embraced patient partnership the way we've seen in some of our oncology research and in mental health. So I think that now, as we see this influx of funding and these partnerships develop, we have an opportunity to really learn in real time what's working and what's not working, and how do we as a community come together to build tools, resources, materials, common learnings to support research done differently. And so it was with that the objective of our project was born, and it was really to build capacity that will facilitate PCOR training, support, and networking, but not for a specific condition. Rather, what are those common lessons we can learn outside of a specific condition or type of research that really helps to move these collaborations forward? And so that's how we came up with Inspire. We have 4 phases to our project, and Sarah has told me I seem to think in phases because my other project is in 2 phases, so this one is by 4s. And it's in 4 separate sections. We're at the 3rd. The first was to learn, and that was to learn from people who are actively engaging with patients and researchers as part of their work. Now that we have funding that's really centered on this engaged research, what are people learning? What are the new needs or gaps in knowledge as we take what's been theory broadly into practice? The second is looking at what currently exists. I think one of the things that I've recognized in my time of this is that a number of groups have tried to develop materials and resources to support their work, but it's happening in one specific study. Now replicate that across a number of studies that people don't have a Research 101, which is something that we heard as a need. So now we have all of these teams and all of these advocacy organizations trying to develop this and to fill that gap. How do we start to figure out what exists so that we can put that to the gaps that are needed and make that available? The third is today, and I'm going to come back to how today was shaped, but to bring together people who bring these diverse experiences together to prioritize what we need to do next to further the field. And then the last, and what we'll be doing on Wednesday, Sarah, Anna, and I are going to do a quick debrief to really take what we learn over the next day and a half and chart that for our own timeline and work plan to develop or help identify tools and resources to make those available to everybody in this room and our broader PCOR community. So I'll come back to that at the end of tomorrow and how this all ties together. So we're through the interviews. Many of you participated in interviews with myself or with Sarah where we learned about your experience, what's working, what's not working, what have you used in your work that other people might find helpful. And from that, we learned a lot. We have a lot of different themes that came out. There's a 35-page report on your table of all of the things that we learned. This was also sent out previously in a PDF. The table copy is yours to peruse through if you're interested in looking back through something or looking at some of the specific details. Rather than go through all 35 pages in depth now, I'm going to pull out some of the key themes and highlight it. And as I once said, it's great to be a qualitative researcher because unlike quantitative where you're looking at numbers, qualitative you look at words and therefore your data speaks for you. So I've pulled some quotes that really resonated with me and really reflected some of the things that we heard. So for many, this is new. And I think this is a great comment from a researcher who was new to this process of engagement in the sense that, you know, let's put patients on research teams. How hard can that be? And then as you get into that and you start to implement it in real time, you start to realize there really are unique challenges and needs as we put this new process into place. This was something that was said by one person, but it was echoed by many. We're learning as we go, and this came from a patient partner, and I liked the analogy. It's sort of swimming in a pool where we all got thrown in together, and some people had better skills than others, but we're all in it together and we're all learning together. And I heard that both from researchers and from patients, that you know what, when we started this, we didn't really know what we were doing, but as we've gone, we've evolved and we've learned new things and we've put new things into place. So I thought it was a great quote to really reflect what other people were saying. Infrastructure is still building. You know, we're starting engaged research broadly while we're still building the infrastructure to find patients and researchers who want to collaborate together in this way. This may not be an approach for involvement that everybody wants to move forward with. So how do we build that infrastructure? How do we change the language of what being engaged in research means? Oftentimes as a researcher, when I'm talking to patients and I'm talking about them partnering with us, I hear back, well, I don't want to consent for a research study. But it's different than what we're asking. We're saying you have expertise and we want you at the table. But that's a new paradigm largely. And so how do we change that language? Diversity needs attention. We have a session focused on this tomorrow, but this is something that people struggled with, both from the researcher perspective, how do we reflect the diverse experiences of healthcare? And I use diverse very broadly, that this means different things around a patient's journey within their healthcare. It means things around race, around gender, around age. So how do we start to reflect these very different experiences of healthcare in the work that we're doing? Patients also feel that stress in terms of being the person that represents the experience or expertise, recognizing their experience is unique. How do they speak for a larger population? So that's an equal challenge that patients are saying, this is overwhelming for us, we need to find a better solution. We'll talk about what some of those might be tomorrow. Finally, evidence is needed. This came from a researcher. I think what you want to do is have a plan and a sense of direction, and it's got to be budgeted, but there's not enough known about this to say, well, here's the right way, here's the wrong way. And what we heard too is people are interested in what different models exist for engagement in research, and that really shaped one of our other sessions that we'll hear from tomorrow. What's working, what's not working, recognizing that we're not pushing a blueprint, that this is the only way to do engagement, but rather what are the things to consider when you're setting up your plan. So those were the things that we heard, which brings us to today. In true admissions, when we started this project, I thought, we'll do these interviews. We'll talk to patients, we'll talk to researchers, and they will tell us very definitively, here's what you need to do in order to make things better. This is what I need from you. And that we would all come together, we would have a workshop, we would set priorities, we would go back, Sarah and I would have, and Anna would have things that we would build, we would take those to our steering committee, they would think it was beautiful, and then the project would end. What I learned was What people really wanted was co-learning. They wanted opportunities to talk with other people about what was happening. And there were two issues that really came consistently across, or what are the right models for engagement, and how do we start to think about diversity within the research that we're doing. And so it's with that we shaped the agenda for today, that there's going to be a lot of co-learning. There's also going to be opportunities to tell us what would help you do the work that you're doing better, so that we can start to fill those gaps or identify things that may already exist to help you in the work that you're doing. So I have 3 goals for today's workshop. The first is to network. We started with some of that just a few minutes ago, impromptu networking. We specifically don't have a working lunch so that people can take time over lunch to enjoy their food and also talk with people and learn more about other work that's going on in our region. And the third is to learn. I'm hoping that we've infused not only the sessions that we have and the discussions we have where people can learn from each other, but other elements about what you can learn. So impromptu networking. One of the things that we heard is, shockingly, researchers run meetings with agendas. Guilty as charged. That we never leave time for, hey, how are you doing? What's new since we met in the last month, in the last 6 months, whatever the case may be. And there's different ways to start meetings. Impromptu networking is one, and you can change the questions, you can change the time. But there are other techniques out there to help break up the research norm, if you will. I encourage patient partners to challenge us when we just send out an agenda in minutes from the prior meeting. Bonnie, you're laughing, and I know that you're speaking of me. The second is going to be an introduction that I give to Makeda. I am so excited to have Makeda join us today. I've had the great privilege of being part of meetings where I've had a graphic recorder. I'm so excited to have Makeda join us and talk about what his skill is and how important the visual aspect of meetings can be. So I'm going to turn it over to Makeda to talk about his craft.
Well, good afternoon, I think is where we are. I know you can hear me, but I was asked to use the microphone for the sake of the video. Is that correct? Okay, so I will use the microphone. My name is Makeda Wilborn. I am a local graphic recorder, graphic facilitator. Graphic recording. How many people are familiar with this process of graphic recording? Just a handful. Kind of cool. So let me just ask you to erase any image in your mind from that one YouTube video, the NSA, when the guy was talking and everything was coming out like perfectly in real time, these amazing pictures of everything. That was sped up, just so you know. That's not what's going to happen over here. So my intention is to capture the core content of what's presented and what emerges from the group and keep it in front of us so that, and support it with visuals so that we can begin to collectively make sense of the information that's emerging. So we start to see the patterns in our thinking, in our sharing, in our ideas, so that we can go away with deeper understanding and deeper learning. That's my intention in supporting the group today. It might get a little bit messy as we move through this, but again, my intention is to capture content primarily. I think of myself as a professional listener. A lot of people keep saying, oh, so you're our artist for the day, and I'm still trying to own the artist mantle. But I'm a listener. I'm an asker of questions, and I'm really a curious person. So I'm very curious to see how the work that you all do today, how it emerges, and what kind of context or what kind of patterns we can begin to see in our own ideas and our own thinking. I know you have a few experts that are going to be speaking, but I believe that the collective knowledge in the room is really where the core of our takeaways are going to live. So my goal is to capture that. To that end, I have put sticky notes, a little pad of sticky notes on each table. What I want to invite you to do is to help me help you capture these salient points. If and when I miss something that you thought was a really salient point, something that should be captured and identified, I'd like you to write it on a sticky note. And anytime during a break or anywhere, please bring it up to me and just stick it on the wall and say, here's something I thought was a really good point. So I can't catch it all. I'm going to do my very best, but please help me by writing those things down. I gave you intentionally somewhat small sticky notes so that you don't give me a paragraph, right? I'm all about efficiency of words, but true to your words, I'll do my best to capture what I can here. And again, there is no spell check on this whiteboard. So I will make mistakes, and when I do, I'll make some adjustments to those. But I also want to do my best to ensure that I capture your content, your words, in a way that is true to what you said. So if I do capture something and shift the words in a way that doesn't quite get to the core of it, let me know. I can make changes and erase things and change, and I'm more than happy to do so to ensure that it feels like it's an accurate representation of what emerged. So
That is awesome.
that's what I'm here to do for you today.
I'm really excited about this. Just as some side notes, we will display these. So throughout the day, tomorrow morning when you're coming back for breakfast, it'll allow you to reflect on what did we talk about over the past day. Tomorrow, at the end of the day, we're going to bring those boards front and center, and that's going to be our visual platform to start making priorities. Everybody's going to get sticky notes, and you're going to be able to vote with your sticky note in terms of what are the things that are most impactful that we should really move forward as a community. Some of those things will be tangible tools and documents. Some of them might be we need more information here, education here, and we'll collectively think about how best to fill those gaps. In learning, Makeda just said, you're going to hear from some experts. I would also say that you're going to hear from some people who like to learn every single day about what to do differently next time. And Makeda was kind enough to help me think through this next learning lesson. So for reasons I won't go into, we actually had a change in venue. There was a different venue that we had selected for this workshop a couple months ago. We had to do some fast footing about 6 weeks ago and find a new place, and we're fortunate to find this location. And on Thursday of last week, Sarah, Anna, and I came to do our final walkthrough. And when we got here, we were remarking about how we were so glad we specifically selected a place that took us outside of a hospital, that took us outside of academia, because oftentimes as researchers, we go where we know, and we end up in a hospital or a university. And by doing that, there's sometimes this inherent tension, if you will, in terms of power control or who really is in charge of a meeting, even though it may not be intended. So here we are in a community setting on Capitol Hill. This is great. Makeda also joined us the second hour of that to walk through so that we had space and location set up for him to do his amazing craft and to engage with us. And at the end of our conversation, he was kind enough to bring up a point, and I'm going to ask Makeda to talk about what his thoughts were.
One of the aspects of my work is around equity and inclusion, diversity, social justice. And I think for every one of us in this room, hopefully that's right here, right now. It's right in front of us. So I walked in here on Thursday, and we were talking about logistics and getting things set. And then I went downstairs to use the restroom because we were finishing our meeting, and there's some more images in the lounge down there. And I came upstairs, and I looked at Danielle and Sarah and Anna, and I said, look, I got to be honest and tell you this place triggers me. Here we are it's a beautiful building. I won't discount the beauty of it, the art of it. However, this space, in context for what's going on currently in the world, represents a colonialism that has led to a lot of the injustice that we are currently seeing in a really ugly way right now. It's not new, but that we're seeing. So I feel it was important to speak to that. What does it mean to walk into this space? For me, I'm coming from an African-American male perspective. We all have different lenses as we walk into this room, and I felt it was important to speak to that. Not that we need to change the venue, but that as we begin to do this work, I believe, and I'm working with a number of organizations around health equity, and this is really unique perspective on research and health and partnerships, community health workers, thinking about the cultural competency of the work that we do. And if we think about the space and the place and how that supports our work, and how do we want to create authentic and effective relationships with patients, between patients and researchers, we're doing this in a hospital. We're doing this in a place of power and control that is held by those researchers. And here we are in a space, well, despite this space, how can we ensure that we think about the context of our work in building these relationships so that we're being culturally competent in a way that allows us to create space and context that allows these patients to feel really engaged in a part of the work, rather than way outside of their own space, way outside of their own comfort, and in a place that might not support the relationship that we're trying to build. Does that make sense? Okay, so that was the point that I brought up, and I appreciate you being willing to put it out into the room. As I was looking at some of the plaques here, and I see some awards for Mrs. Samuel McDonald and Mrs. John Williams, and downstairs some posters around Boy Scouts of America, anti-gay group, and this idea of gender subordination. So how does this support the work we're doing? Or we should at least be aware of the context in which we are doing our work so that it can inform our conversations and our practice, particularly if we're going to talk tomorrow about diversity in the context of this work. So thanks for considering that. If you want to ask me any more questions or talk more further about it, I'm more than happy to do so, because I feel like right now in this country, it's about the conversations that we are willing to have, whether they challenge us or whether they are conversations that we're just anxious and itching to have. So thanks for inviting me to put that piece in.
No, and I appreciate it. And I also think, it's an important thing to consider that we think in healthcare and research, but sometimes we don't think about how symbolism, how history, how context can influence the comfort somebody has in just bringing their voice to the table. They can be distracted by something else unrelated to the project at hand, but maybe not feel comfortable and safe in an environment. And so I've reflected a lot about this issue in general, but specifically over this course of this weekend since Makeda brought this up. And what's interesting, for those of you who aren't familiar with Seattle, when I think of the epicenter of tolerism, of acceptance, and of diversity, I think of Capitol Hill, which is where this site actually sits. It's probably one of our most progressive part of the city. And so when I was thinking about this, it's an interesting symbol historically in terms of where it sits today. And I reflected on the parallel that has in research, right? The historic reputation research hasn't always done the best by patients in terms of respect. We still call them human subjects, which is one of my just terms like nails on a chalkboard. So we still have a way to go. And it actually makes me feel great about the focus of today, which is research done differently. That I challenge each of us to think about how do we carry this forward, and thinking about the ideas that we bring to the table. What are those big audacious goals that we should set in order to move patient-centered, stakeholder-centered research forward? So I appreciate Makeda bringing that up, because I do want to have an open discussion. If anybody has any concerns or questions, don't hesitate to ask me, or if you ever at any point don't feel comfortable bringing a topic up, let me know. We'll make sure it gets infused one way or the other. So with that, and on this impetus of research done differently, I'm going to show a brief movie starring this team over here. Karen and her team put together a great video about patient and stakeholder engaged research. And so as a transition to our next remarks, who's going to come from a PCORI engagement officer I have on a separate project, and a PCORI representative, Shenenye, I'm going to show that video, and then we're going to hear from PCORI about research done differently. Before I transition, any questions, comments? All right, then I will get the switch over here. Watch my technical prowess in real time.
The project that we are doing, called SIMBA, is studying the effect of mammography plus breast MRI compared to mammography alone in women with a personal history of breast cancer. At the time that I was trying to put this project together, I was pursuing the traditional route, which is to apply for research funding from the National Institute of Health. And at the same time, I was being trained in doing patient-centered outcomes research. So I took the research idea that I had and then tried to find women to partner with in our community about how to make this project more relevant to patients and clinicians.
What we need to do is actually get more primary care providers and more clinicians who are actually there in the trenches to participate on these kinds of studies. And I think with regard to the stakeholder panel, for me, it's been very educational to be on the same panel with radiologists, medical oncologists, health services researchers, patients, and myself representing the primary care provider.
In our project, we are working with 2 patient partners. These are women who've had prior breast cancer, and they are involved in all of the research activities.
We're in meetings, we participate in scientific phone calls, we do presentations, we coordinate the local advisory committee. We're kind of there to ground people in a way.
When we first started, that was a very intimidating room to walk into, knowing how much schooling they had, how expert they were in their field, and I didn't know what we could offer that they wouldn't already know. But as time went on, we realized that they were willing to listen to what we had to say about a patient point of view, and we really formed a relationship where we had open exchange of ideas and conversation.
It has just really been fun to to see how much give and take there is and how much the stakeholders and the researchers learn about each other. I think that's been one of the strengths of the project.
A lot of people have knowledge, but you don't know how to share the knowledge. So I believe that Simba created that platform to begin with, trying to understand ourselves, what do we want to do, and how we can help through professional guidance.
I've typically done studies mostly looking at data and not necessarily interacting with the patients. And so watching them interact in the scientific meetings has also been beneficial, just in terms of they provide insights and ask questions that I think none of us think to ask as researchers. And they also help us bring it back to, well, what is this going to mean for the patients?
It's really important that the patient's views and ideas do not get overshadowed and overlooked, because sometimes the doctors or the stakeholders don't always think about everything, and then they're like, aha, so that's how the patients feel.
This is unique, and we're using our patients to help direct the research. If you give a research question to a group of doctors and you say, what should we study? They say, survival, recurrence, and morbidity. And but you ask the same question to patients, they say, how am I going to feel? What am I going to look like? What is my relationship with my family going to be?
Sometimes, you know, speaking the same language, sometimes you don't even think of what you're saying, that the person may not understand the lingo. So I think that can be, I don't know if challenging, but an important thing to consider is that everyone is understanding the same information and the question that's before us.
The patient voices have been heard in this study, and I think that we are evolving our methodology to answer some of the questions that the patients have had. And I think that that is clearly missing from some of the other research that we do.
I really want to find and develop opportunities to engage patients much more in the research I do. They really are key to defining the most salient problems, research questions to address. So from point A, involve the patients, and then continue incorporating them and integrating them into the research team throughout.
Having the patients involved in particular helps to remind the whole research team that there are real women behind the data that we look at, and being able to keep our research honest and relevant to real women is what makes this structure and this project different.
I have learned so much about how research works. I've learned how to interact with oncologists and biostatisticians and people from all different walks of life. And I think that we can make medicine better by working together.
All right. Thank you, Karen and team, for that, Diane and Mary.